So today, unfortunately, because of the format, because of the medium we're using, this is a webinar and it therefore cannot be as interactive as if we were all together in the same room, unfortunately. But we will, of course, have that opportunity to be together in person again in April, which I'm very much looking forward to. But today is a little bit more of a dry style where you will be hearing a lot of my voice, I'm afraid. And I'll be kind of talking at you. But as I was saying before, please feel free to use the group chat just to throw any questions, comments, ideas in there. And as much as I can, I'll try and keep an eye on it so that I can respond to anything, particularly if it's a question relevant to what we're talking about at the moment. But the whole session won't just be me talking. We will have an opportunity at the end to exchange ideas. If there are any questions, if anyone wants to share anything in particular related to what we've covered today, then yeah, we'll have that opportunity. I'll make it. Okay, for me, as a liaison, that usually and best way for it is taking care of looking after your clients. So I remember artists like musicians, photographers, graffiti artists, whatever it might be, anyone who guests at your festival you invited for creative purposes, anyone who's preferable. So talking about tangible responsible sense. And obviously all need an audience for our full business events, but just essential is the chat, the creative, and that's the reason I think that all of us do what we do because we want to share that more widely. And so obviously we need to take good care of that and help them to produce or perform the best they possibly can. In today's session, we'll be looking at liaison, something that is connected to, but not saying that's data programming. So today's read up from your artist like or something, and this is something else that we'll be turning to again in April. We actually did that. So just looking a little bit at the role then. It will depend on the scale of the festival size of your team, and sometimes you will be having to co-opt people from roles into looking after artists because you don't have a dedicated department. But as festivals grow, you'll find people. I think it's useful to think what are the key things that you need to look for, what kind of people are going to be good at this job, which is an exciting job, and sometimes a glamorous job, sometimes very much not a glamorous job. And I think, yeah, it requires a certain kind of person to do well. Attention to detail is obviously something I think that is relevant across our team, but it's particularly important when you're dealing with the technical requirements of artists and making sure that they feel that their work is presented in the best possible way. And these little details become very, very important to that. You also need someone who understands artists. I think that's really important. Sometimes we use people for our artist liaison team who are artists themselves because they really understand what's needed. And what might seem to an outsider as an absurd request, why do you need this particular kind of drink before you go on stage? Why do you need this, that, and the other thing? I think it's important to understand that sometimes these things are necessary to perform creatively. And alongside that, also someone who is really sociable and connects well with people, who is used to dealing with different types of people, particularly creative people, but at the same time someone who is not answerable to the artists primarily, but to the festival and to the festival team, and who is going to know how to say no and be a little firm, because you're not able to give every artist everything that they want. I'd say actually probably most of an artist liaison role is essentially saying no to a lot of artists most of the time, but it's about saying no in a way that they can understand and respect it. So I think when you're looking at these potential recruits for a department like this, it's also worth bearing in mind where you might be drawing these people from, because some of us are lucky to have a core festival team where you might have artist liaison part of the whole festival cycle throughout the year. But for most of us, it'll be people that we bring in just for the event, and that might mean working with volunteers, for example. So it's really important to find the right kind of volunteers who are really motivated to work with artists and not just in it to get the selfie with the headliner kind of thing. Similarly, you will also need to think as part of this, I think it's worth mentioning at this stage, you will have people who are concerned with coordinating the overall artist liaison team, people who are working with different groups for different sections of your festival, but you might also have minders. So minders are people who will be dedicated to a particular group. You won't have that for most of your artists, but for headline acts or for celebrity creatives who are attending, you might, especially if they're international, you might want to have someone who's kind of with them throughout the entire festival. For two main reasons. Number one is if it's a different kind of context or culture, then having someone from that culture to help them navigate it and have the best possible experience is really important. But also headline artists, particularly musicians, can be a little rock and roll sometimes, mess up hotel rooms, get too drunk to perform, that kind of thing. So someone just to keep a bit of an eye on them and make sure that they're in the best possible state to deliver the performance that you want. I think with all roles, it's really important to define the responsibilities and the reporting structures early on. But you're also going to be looking for people who are able to be flexible, to respond quickly and with an open and positive attitude to all the kinds of time-sensitive issues that will crop up during your live event that you may not have expected. And in that vein, someone who is solution-oriented, who's able to say, right, well, this seems difficult, but I'm sure we can help you in some way. We might not be able to give you all of this, but maybe what about this? Would that work? Rather than someone who just says, no, that's not possible. So key responsibilities. I'm going to go into a little bit later on talking through some of the specific kinds of tasks that an artist liaison role might be concerned with. But again, taking care of your talent, I think, is a good way of framing it, and facilitating your performers' experience of your festival. I think that is the key thing that kind of is the thread that runs through this role. And in terms of the liaison aspect, it's also a bridge really between your performers and between the rest of your team. Artists can be quite demanding, and you need people who are able to field their requests rather than just having the artists harass all of your festival team throughout your event. So that's really important for them to sort of be the first point of contact. Because artists sort of fit into this funny space where they are external to the festival team, but they do have backstage access. So they are a kind of behind the scenes entity, but they aren't necessarily representatives of your festival, which can be a difficult relationship to manage sometimes. So the kinds of, just a broad overview of what an artist liaison team might be involved with. Bookings, they may not always do the bookings themselves, but they should have knowledge of that process. They'll be handling artist logistics. They will be looking after the technical requirements or making sure that, the technical requirements are understood by the technical team. And then during the event itself, they'll be kind of escorting artists around the site and sort of taking care of them. So I've sort of mocked up this little organogram style illustration, which is not representative. I'm not saying that artist liaison is bigger or more important than any other department in your team, but I just wanted to illustrate how interconnected the role is. I think probably more than any other department, artist liaison is going to be having relationships with every other role within the festival, essentially, quite regularly. There's going to be a lot of communication back and forth between artist liaison and all these departments. And when it comes to challenges that arise during your event, artist liaison is going to need the help of these other departments to problem solve. I mean, just quickly to talk through a couple of examples of relationships. Box office is really important because artists might have guests. So are they going to be well handled by the box office? Are they aware that the headliner's guests are going to be coming in expecting their accreditation at a certain time? Sponsors and VIPs, sometimes part of the whole package you're selling is the opportunity to meet some of your headline artists. You need to be able to work with sponsor liaison, whoever's managing the VIP area, to make sure that that actually happens, but they don't harass your artists too much. Artists are really key to your Media presence. Are you going to need them for social media? How much are you going to allow that to happen? Finance, obviously, you need to make sure they know this artist needs to get paid at this time, and this is how they would like to receive their payment. Nothing worse than having unhappy, unpaid artists. Obviously, logistics, that's a huge aspect of the artist liaison role, making sure that they are fed and accommodated and transported as expected. Security, needing to make sure your artists are safe, particularly headliners. That's very important, getting them just from place to place on site. If you do have a big name as part of your lineup, that can be crucial as well. And also for international acts who may not be entirely familiar with our contexts on this continent, they sometimes expect higher levels of security, rightly or wrongly, but the point is you need to set them at ease and make them feel comfortable. And then even the site team is going to be important. So here I have listed, it's not a comprehensive list, but this is all about the kinds of dedicated spaces that you might want to think about for your festival site when it comes to artists and their experience of your event. And I think it's important to think a lot about the flow. Like when artists arrive, where do they go to? Where do they go to next? And where do they go to next? These are generally creative people who are coming to your event wanting to experience it and get the most out of it. They want to connect with other creative people, and that often leads to them kind of disappearing off and maybe having a few too many drinks or starting to get into a jam session right before they're supposed to be on stage or whatever it might be. So you need to kind of, take care of them a little bit and think about the different spaces and what their journey through your event will be like. So an accreditation point is really, I think, a good starting point to think this through. And this is all very much a pre-production kind of thing. So artist liaison during the event, you're going to have a very busy role, but there's also a lot to think through ahead of it and make sure that these things are in place when you're planning your venue or your festival site. By accreditation, just to be clear, I mean like wristbands or lanyards, any kind of identification that you are using, might be a stamp, to determine who is allowed into your festival site and also which areas of your festival site are they allowed into. I know that some of you have free events, so that might seem like you don't need accreditation, but obviously there's going to be areas of the site, like backstage, for example, where you only really want crew members or artists, so they might need something simple as a lanyard, a badge, whatever it might be. And it's important not to just bring artists into the site and then think about giving them the wristbands or whatever, but to have a kind of welcome point where you can accredit them before they come in, but that is also a pleasant experience for them. You don't necessarily want your headliners to be coming in through the box office with the general public. So just think about what the flow of that is going to be. Sometimes we're asked for rehearsal spaces, especially with international acts. They might not be able to, or we might not be able to afford to bring their full band, so they might be playing with a drummer. Locally, they might need somewhere. They might arrive the same day as their performance where they can just practice quickly. Instrument lockup, really important if you have musicians, but really any kind of visiting guests, creatives are going to want somewhere to store their stuff that is safe, and that is up to you. You'll need to think through issues around liability, but obviously you need to give them the opportunity to have somewhere stay safe where they can then leave stuff and go and enjoy your festival. Some people will want a dressing room. You need to think about accommodation. Where is it going to be? Is it going to be on-site, off-site, access between those spaces? Are they going to want to go to their room before they come and perform? And then a green room, I think probably most of us understand what that is. It can mean slightly different things in the theatre as opposed to a festival, but essentially it's a space for your talent to escape your festival a little bit, to chill out, somewhere where there might be refreshments, a certain level of privacy, basically anywhere that they can just take a moment to prepare themselves for their performance or chill out after their performance. You might have a VIP area, which you might sell tickets for separately. It might be reserved for sponsors. And that might be somewhere where artists also have the opportunity to kind of congregate. Normally works quite well if they have a dedicated bar, VIPs, sponsors are happy if artists are already there, but it's an attractive space. Backstage area. It doesn't seem important, but just having somewhere behind your stage, whatever your stage might be, or around it in some way, that is screened off from the rest of the festival. Whether you're just having writers come up and speak, or whether you're having a full band perform, just thinking about somewhere that is private, because that's a really important moment before someone goes up and stands up in front of a lot of people to deliver whatever it is that they're performing. They need a moment just to center themselves rather than be harassed by people asking for autographs or selfies or whatever. And that space needs to be well looked after, well maintained. You don't want all your crew members hanging out there having a smoke or something. But it doesn't need to be much, just something with a few chairs that's private. A recording studio or a photo booth or some kind of creative space as well isn't something that we're always able to deliver. But when we can, even if it's something impromptu, even if it's something you invite an artist to come and set up themselves in a hotel room or something, I think that helps to encourage exactly the kinds of collaborations that we like to see when we're bringing creative people together. And then think about media spaces, not relevant just to artists, but it will be something you need to think through in terms of the flow. Are they coming straight from the stage to, have an interview with a local TV channel, for example? So just think through that a little bit. And it will be the artist liaison's role to make sure that these spaces are well maintained, that they're in good condition, that they're escorting artists between them, and fulfilling all the various requirements about social media and interviews, but at the same time making sure it's not too stressful in experience. So just quickly, I'm going to talk through the kinds of things then that Artist Liaison will be doing, not just during the event, but the full cycle. These might not be all taken on by one person or one department, depends on the structure of your team, but it's worth kind of thinking of grouping them together. Even if you have a logistics person who is handling transport and accommodation for everyone, which you might do, it's good just to break it apart into, well, how does this work for artists? Because they might need separate requirements to other kinds of guests that you're looking after. So in terms of a pre-production role, booking your creative programming, basically, fielding artist applications, pursuing certain acts, whatever that might be. It might not be your artist liaison team who are in charge of this, but if they can be involved in some capacity, then that's really going to help when it comes to the festival, because these are going to be the people who are looking after the people you've booked, the artists. So if they are aware of the whole booking process and why this act was booked and what was agreed, it's going to make their job a lot easier when it comes to the event. When you're dealing with artists, when you're booking, you might need to think a little bit about artist funding. There are, I think, we mentioned a few of them in Lagos, a number of different Africa-specific grants for artist travel, particularly mobility grants. And it's always worth acts that you may not otherwise be able to afford, kind of pushing them in the direction of those grants. So it'll be the artist liaison team's role to understand what's available, what you might be eligible for. As much as possible, get the artists to apply for it themselves, so you reduce your admin. Contracting, really important, as much as possible to contract your artists, and it's best if your artist liaison people will do it, because they'll be the people who might be referring to the contract during the festival itself. I know for some of us, the kinds of artists that we're working with may not be very familiar with contracting processes. As Lake of Stars, we work with a wide range of artists from within Malawi and internationally. Some people are very familiar and they have their own contract and it's very detailed. Other people, we just have to do it over WhatsApp. It's probably not legally binding, but it is something that if you can sort of screenshot and print out that WhatsApp conversation, put it in a folder, when it comes to the artist arriving at your event and saying, I need to be paid before I perform, you could say, well, actually, we did agree it was after your performance that you were going to get paid. Do you remember this? And it might just help that conversation go a little bit more easily. And then, at this point, you're going to be asking artists for a lot of stuff, publicity information. So it could be biographies, photographs. Maybe have they got a new release coming out? Is there anything newsworthy? Have they had an interview recently that you can share in your press releases and your social media channels? And so all of this aspect that I'm talking about now is what we call advancing, festival advancing. So basically it just means getting information in advance. And that applies particularly to artists. And that's, I'd probably say, one of the most important ways to make an artist liaison role go smoothly is to do your advancing well in advance. And if you can get this information ahead of time, although things are inevitably going to go wrong during your festival that you will need to deal with, the more information you have in advance, the easier your life is going to be. So you'll also be asking for technical aspects, hospitality riders. I'll come on to just unpacking those a bit in a moment. And then logistics. This is always a headache, but really, really important. And this is for artist liaison. Even if they're not the ones making the bookings, they will have to understand every aspect and make sure all the information is correct. So booking flights, booking transport on the ground, making sure accommodation is sorted and it's not double booked, thinking through your meals for artists, drinks for artists, whatever it might be. And you're going to be providing information packs. A little bit later, I'm going to talk about what you're going to include in those information packs, but that's something that's going to go out. Could be 2 weeks before your festival, could be a month before your festival, depends on how organized you are. Could be 2 days before your festival, as long as something goes out that will help the artists understand what to expect. As we've spoken about already, it's about facilitating the festival experience during the live event as well. It's going to be a really busy period for your artist liaison team. You're going to be running around like crazy, and if they're doing their job right. And then, as with all departments, there is a post-event review process. So an evaluation. It's always great to send out a survey to all your artists, and you can put that together with a report on how the department performed, challenges, and so on and so forth, recommendations. It's good to have a meeting, but it's also so good just to put that down in writing because, especially for those of us who are working with freelancers, with volunteers, our teams change from year to year. So it's really important to have that institutional knowledge recorded somewhere that, future departments can reference and learn from. And just on the artist surveys, I think it's really useful just to send out, something like SurveyMonkey or Google form, rather than asking for a big long rant in an email or a phone conversation. Just get a bit of a sense of what their experience was like, a few multiple choice questions, and then a box for them to share extra thoughts. Because we might think that we've understood how an artist felt about our festival, but artists are sometimes very polite, and they might not necessarily they could see you're busy, they might not want to tell you about something that's gone wrong because they think they're not going to be able to fix it anyway. So it's really important to know what went wrong and what went right. And we find that, when we send that out to all of our artists the week after the festival, we hear about all kinds of things that we had no idea even happened sometimes. So it's a really important part. And I think, another aspect, I think I shared this with you in Lagos, don't worry too much about the text, it's just to give you an example of how artist liaison are also going to be concerned with sort of selling your festival to artists. They're going to be doing the kind of marketing work that your PR department might be doing for festival goers, but this is dedicated to artists and thinking about how can we make this experience more attractive to them. For us, we're very lucky. We have a very beautiful setting and a beautiful context, so we really sell that. Like, come and experience the kind of festival that you may not have experienced before in a setting that you haven't experienced before. We suggest, we can team up with travel partners to give you a safari experience or, a lake trip or something. And you also see in that little yellow box, we have a quote with a thank you from a manager of a Nigerian artist who performed for us a couple of years ago. So it's really good to get that kind of stuff. When you send out the artist survey, when you get positive responses, save those because they're going to be really helpful. If I'm a manager and I'm thinking, traveling to Malawi, to Nigeria, these really good places for my artists to be safe and have a good time. But then when they read from other managers what an amazing experience they had, how well looked after they were, I think that really helps to convince people, no, this could really, really work. And again, as I think I mentioned in Lagos, think about how you can team up with other regional promoters to share travel costs and make the whole trip a little bit more lucrative commercially for the international artists that you're booking. And if you take good care of them, then they will become champions for your festival and ambassadors for your country as well. What I want to just touch on now is the whole advancing aspect. This is getting information from your artists in advance. And there are different ways of doing it. Inevitably, we find ourselves doing it over WhatsApp, over the phone, over email, but it can be quite difficult to keep a track of that, especially if you've got a number of different people doing that with different artists. One good tip is to have, again, with Google Forms or SurveyMonkey or something, send out a fillable form, because you might ask them like 5 questions in an email and then they'll come back and they'll answer 1. And that's no good. It takes a lot of time chasing them up. But if you have a form, they sort of have to fill out everything. And the kind of information you're going to be wanting are things like riders. So rider, I'm sure most of you are familiar, but basically it's just a term for what does the artist require? What is their setup and what are they expecting from you? And what can you expect them to bring as well? And there are 2 types of riders. There's the technical rider and then there's the hospitality rider. So with a technical rider, you're going to have things like their sound engineering, what kind of sound design they want, and what's their style, a lighting design potentially, if that's relevant, what equipment they will be bringing, what equipment they expect you to provide, and potentially a stage plot. So that's what that image is there. Just an idea of where are the keyboards going to be, where is the drum kit going to be, do they expect a drum riser, where should the amps be, what kind of backline do they need, and so on and so forth. As artist liaison, it's really important to understand what all these things mean as much as possible, but really your role is to make sure that that information is transferred to your technical department and that they have everything sorted. Sometimes, well, very often, it will be the stage manager who actually contacts artist management to get this kind of information. It might not be artist liaison, but again, it will depend on your team structure and who is involved early on to request this kind of information. And whoever it is asking for it, I think it's really important to know whom you're dealing with. Because sometimes artists will give you one set of information, their managers will tell you something different. And then, you know, maybe if they're touring, their sound engineer might come in and tell you something again that doesn't match up. So it's really important to understand who actually has authority on this issue and establish one person that you are dealing with for every artist early on. Normally that would be a manager, but it could be, you know, a regional tour promoter for a big international act as well. And obviously, you know, you're going to need to catch at this point anything that you cannot meet. If they're asking for 2 big LED screens to run some kind of graphic presentation on and you don't have them, you either need to go and find them or you need to go back to management and say, we can't afford this, or we don't have it, what about this alternative, or how important is this? And that might even be the kind of conversation you need to have before a contract is signed. So, hospitality riders. Not every act is going to have it, so don't always ask them, what do you want us to buy for you for free, because then you're setting up expectations. But certainly for big acts, international acts, they're going to expect some stuff that's going to be complimentary. So a hospitality rider is basically anything that involves their entertainment requests, things they might need personally, food and drink, that kind of thing generally. Access to towels, for example, in their dressing room. Tea, they might want tea with honey, for example, or they might want a certain brand of whiskey. And that's the kind of thing that artist liaison is going to have to note down and go and shop for the week of the event. There are a lot of absurd and ridiculous requests that have sort of entered urban legend. One of them is an American band called Van Halen. I think in the 1980s, they would request M&Ms, those little kind of chocolate sweets. And they come in a pack with multiple colors mixed together. They didn't want any of the brown ones. You had to remove all of the brown ones and take them out of their dressing room, which was a humorous thing. But their manager actually explained it, saying, we put that in there because as soon as I walk into a festival, as soon as I come to a venue, I go to the green room, and if I see any brown M&Ms in there, I know that there's going to be other problems with this event. I know they haven't read some other technical detail about the sound design, because if they've missed this important thing, they've missed other things. It might seem stupid, but if I walk in and I see that they've done it and there's no brown M&Ms, I know I can expect a good show from this promoter. So I think it's important to read these sort of things very carefully, go back. You might want to say, listen, we've read it. We can't deliver this one. We don't have this brand of whiskey with this alternative dew that we can access locally. And normally, manager will be quite happy that you've at least read it and are trying to meet their requests. Just got a couple more. Well, actually, this is the last slide, because I want to leave enough time for any questions or ideas from you. So feel free to start throwing them into the chat box now. That would be helpful. But I think for me, another way, a useful kind of tip, I guess, for making sure that Artist Liaison runs well and that your department has a smooth festival experience is to use your information packs and to use them as a really important deadline in your planning process. If you say, we want to send them out 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks before our festival, try and stick to that deadline, because all the information that you need for those information packs can be found in advance. And if you have it 2 weeks before your festival, you're going to find the last 2 weeks are going to be relatively easygoing. Relatively, I mean, it is still a festival, but having that information together and being able to communicate that in a timely fashion to your artists will really help you. So what kind of stuff might you put in there? I mean, it's going to differ from festival to festival, but you're going to want a personal schedule. So this will help you think through the flow. What kind of spaces do you have arranged? Do you have an accreditation point? Do you have a green room? When are their press interviews going to be? So this schedule will tell this particular act, you know, we know you're arriving on this flight, or we know we will expect you to arrive at this bus station at this time. So it'll include transport. It might include their sound check time, how long their performance is. That's probably something you've discussed already, but just confirming this is your exact time of your performance. What kind of timings are we expecting you to give up for interviews? And sometimes you'll send this out and there might be a bit more discussion. You might have to revise it, but hopefully you've gotten this all agreed ahead of time. And just on the sound check point, I wanted to mention, if you are producing a concert and you've got 1 or 2 bands performing, let's say, they're going to expect a full sound check. They'll come in advance of people arriving, they'll do their sound check, then they'll go to their green room and hang out until they have to perform. In a festival, almost no matter what we're doing, whether it's stand-up comedians or singers or whatever, we're not always going to have a chance to offer a sound check because we've got act after act after act very often. But sometimes headliners or those acts who have a particularly complex sound or lighting design may request it. So you'll need to think, well, do we do it in the morning? So for us, for example, if we have a headliner performing on Saturday night, we'll have to bring them in at like 10 a.m. before most people are really back at the festival site, get them to do their sound check then. So that's obviously something you need to plan into their flight arrival times and so on and so forth. And as part of that, you want them to have all of their travel information, booking details, and so on and so forth, information about their accommodation, where they'll be staying, maybe a phone number, maybe directions, contact numbers for relevant team people, and their minder, head of artist liaison, potentially other team members, but not too many. Then you'll want marketing info, what you're expecting from them. Here are social media handles, looking forward to retweeting stuff from you. Here are the hashtags we're using, whatever it might be. A sitemap, that's always very handy to include. Bands are always very impressed, I find. You know, it's like, oh, cool, this is what the site looks like, and they can start to visualize a little bit as well. And more general info about the venue. They might want to be inviting fans, so they might want directions. And then really important to think about vehicle access. Will there be parking? Will they need to have a special parking permit? So yeah, think that through as well. And I think it's also, good to just on the venue info and on the transfer info, just to make sure they know, are they going to have the chance to come to the venue? Will they then have time to go to their hotel and then come back? What's expected of them in terms of the flow? And also an opportunity to confirm all their technical requirements. I would say reattach to this document their technical rider and their hospitality rider if they have one. So give them the opportunity to just, whoa, okay, no, that's not our rider, that's a rider for another band. Because sometimes that happens. They'll send you something with a file name like tech rider, and then you get confused and you think it's, for P Square, but it's actually from Afiki Zolo, and then you're in big trouble. So it's a good chance just to double check you've got everything correct. Helpful phrases, especially for international acts if they don't know the language. Local tips, like where's the best place to get takeaway, what restaurants or activities could we recommend? That can really help them to enjoy the experience a lot more and speak more positively about it and want to come back. Yeah, so confirming their riders, I was saying, but also their personnel. How many people are performing? How many people are on the guest list? What are their names? When are you going to get paid? How are you going to get paid? Really good just to double check that that's all understood by everyone. And you might also want to include something about merchandise if you're allowing people to sell CDs or T-shirts or paintings or whatever it might be. Give them an idea of whether they can do that and where they can do it. And if you're able to offer a dedicated booth for them to do that, it just makes it a little less awkward when people are like, oh, after my performance, come and get some CDs from me. And then they're kind of milling around in the crowd and it's not very clear. So just to have somewhere they can go, or a book signing area, for example, of the literature festival, stuff like that is very, very useful. And then, yeah, include the full program. That's something that's always a good deadline to work towards, make sure everything is set. And then you can announce it publicly at that point as well. And it gives them the opportunity to have a sense of who they're performing with. Might be a conversation you want to have earlier with artists. We like to see a lot of collaborations happening. People tend to get quite excited. Oh, this act is also going to be attending the festival. Maybe we can try and do something together while we're there, or at least, chat about a collaboration. And if that comes out of your festival, that's great PR for you. So I hope that's useful. It's been a big kind of information dump. So I apologize for that. But unfortunately, I think it's necessitated by the format of a webinar, unfortunately. Thank you. I've seen a few questions coming through now, so I'll touch on those ones first. Feel free to keep them coming. We've got 15 minutes left. So yeah, time to share ideas. If there's anything that you wanted to add that you feel like I didn't touch on that might be relevant to others, please feel free to share that as well. And if you want to be able to speak, maybe just type in the chat and request for us to have your mic on. But for a moment, I'm just going to touch on some of these things that people have shared in the chat. So Desmond, dressing room, green room, backstage and interview room seems like a duplication of space, which is sometimes not practically available in small venues. Absolutely. No, I completely agree. The list I was sharing, I guess, is, we don't even have all of those spaces, at a big festival site that we construct ourselves. So I think there are more ideas for things you might want to think about. A dressing room and a green room, I don't think most of us are going to have that possibility. But for example, some acts will have costume changes during their performance. So you might need a space where they can do that. That just might be a portion of your backstage area, whereas your green room is somewhere where people can just hang out or have a drink or something. But I absolutely agree. You're going to have to use some of these spaces a little bit creatively. So don't by any means take that list as like, this is what you must have, but more as a way for artist liaison department just to think through what kind of things might the artists need and how can we fulfill those needs in a creative way. Rashida, question for Patrick. How best do you deal with difficult managers? Yes, that's a very good question. And no one has all the answers to that one. I find that artists are often easy from my experience, but managers are unnecessarily demanding. In my experience, I think that's also true. We find that artists tend to be very creative people who want to give the best possible performance. Managers, there's a whole range of managers. There's lots of amazing managers who do a lot of good work. and sometimes they're the most organized people to deal with. But fundamentally, you know, that relationship is a commercial one a lot of the time. They'll obviously want to believe in the artist's creative vision as well, but essentially they're looking for a cut. So they might be demanding a lot more. They're also basically just trying to look after. I think the main thing is to understand managers and to say what they want to do is they want to look after their artists. They want to keep their job, basically. And that means the artists need to have a good time, and they need to have lots of stuff, and they need to feel like they're a big deal or whatever. I think it is a case of just saying to managers, we understand, and we respect your artists, and we want to produce the best possible event together, and to be fairly honest about the resources that you have. And this comes back to things we were talking about in Lagos with sponsor management. Don't promise anything that you can't deliver. Always sort of under promise, like Liz was saying, and then over deliver. And I think that that's something that, you know, if managers are not expecting too much, but then you're able to deliver everything that you said you would, it tends to make that relationship a little bit easier. So another question from Rashida is, can both technical and hospitality riders be rolled into one? Because I find that hospitality is often taken for granted around here. So yes, often with artists that do have both technical and hospitality, it'll just be one document. And hospitality is really important, and making sure artists are well taken care of. And if you're able to provide them with certain things just as standard for free, like you all get some drinks tokens, or you all get food throughout the entire festival, or in the green room you will have access to free tea and coffee, for example. If you can do that, then that's great. And you should communicate that to all the artists ahead of time. Say, this is what you can expect. But in general, I wouldn't ask artists for hospitality riders. Don't go out of your way, because it's basically a way for them to make you spend more money on stuff in addition to what you're paying them already. If they want, 10 bottles of Johnny Walker or something, that's going to cost you quite a lot of money. It's just some drinks, they'll say, but you need to think about that in a budget sense. And that's maybe something I should have touched on, is budget oversight. Is really important, because artist liaison, you need to think about, do they have the authority to sign off on payments during your festival? Because an artist might come to you, it might be one of the biggest names in the world. You got Kanye West at your event, and he's like, could you get me some drinks from the bar? Or could you get me like a stretch limousine or something? And he really, really, really wants it. And you don't want to upset this guy, but who has the authority? Is it just the person who's looking after them? They can just sign off on it and spend a whole load of money. So you need to think through those financial structures very, very carefully. Because artist liaison generally is going to want to give artists the stuff that they want, because it makes their life easier. But you need to have someone with a sense of, with budget oversight, basically, to understand if that's something that you can really afford. And that's also really important, is always include some contingency for artists during your festival. They will want extra stuff. And if they've had a bad experience, maybe their flight was delayed or something, and maybe their car broke down and they're kind of thirsty and annoyed, you're going to have to take good care of them, which might mean having to spend more money and stuff. So yeah, generally I think with hospitality riders, don't sort of give artists the idea that they can expect to get lots of free stuff from you. But it is worth thinking about how you can make that experience meaningful for them, and reserving some budget in case of anything that might need to be spent during the event. Another thing actually maybe just worth mentioning, again, I think a lot of this has applied to international artists, but if you have people, if you're in a malarial region, or if you need yellow fever vaccinations, whatever it might be, make sure that that's communicated in good time to anyone who's traveling from outside your region. Because you don't want to be caught out with them arriving at the airport and not having the right kind of medicines and not being allowed to get on their flight. So really good to sort of communicate that as soon as possible, and try and find out as much as you can, like, if you're coming from this country, I've looked up, this is where you can get them for this price. And, you might have to include that as part of your agreement that you cover those costs. As festival organizers, is it advisable to have standard hospitality riders for all performing artists? Obviously taking into account dietary needs. Yes, sorry, I've covered that a little bit with, you need to think through what you can provide a standard. So, I mean, maybe just to be clear on the terminology, a hospitality rider would generally be the kinds of stuff you would provide in a green room or some kind of backstage area that is specific to one artist and that are requests that they feel are unique to them. Like, I need a wet towel, or I need air conditioning, or I need a certain type of food. And they might also include allergies or any other dietary stuff. Something that is very much part of the artist liaison thing and the hospitality experience are the things that we are providing as standard. So meals, and you may want to provide some drinks, either free waters, maybe coupons if you have a bar, something like that. So what we do, I think, is we provide meal vouchers, which are redeemable with any of our on-site food vendors, and artists are given those on arrival. And we only provide them with meals for the day that they are performing. So we don't give them throughout the whole festival. But I wish that we could. But again, I mean, it is a budget question. And if you're able to provide meals throughout the whole festival, that definitely makes sense. But it's not something that every festival will do. Even, you know, big festivals that had a lot of budget, for smaller acts, they get nothing sometimes, absolutely nothing. They don't even get a free water. Whereas headliners will be treated to a full experience. I think generally we found trying to give all artists pretty much the same treatment works best, and creates less of the kind of problematic hierarchies between headliners and other artists. But yeah, obviously plan for that in your budget. If you're feeding artists, if you're doing maybe crew catering, if you're already doing that, that might be a cheaper way. Get the artists to have access to the crew catering, something like that as well. In regards to timelines, when should invitations, confirmations, and then sending information packs happen? Good question. And I think, yeah, that will change for all of us. I think for some of us, we don't have our funding confirmed until a few months before our festival, which means we can't commit to that much until we know we have the money. So obviously that will determine things. I think the short answer is everything should be as early as you possibly can do it, knowing that you can actually afford it. Invitations, I mean, we, especially with, again, I'm talking about international acts, those conversations sometimes happen years in advance. We might be getting in touch with an artist that we want to book, and it won't work out. They're like, sorry, we've got a tour booked, or we're recording at that time, or we've got another event, or whatever it might be. And so we say, okay, fine, let's keep in touch. And those conversations kind of happen a little bit back and forth over sometimes a long period of time. Major Lazer, for example, we had that act come and perform for us this year. We were first in touch with Diplo, one of the producers, in 2015. There was interest, there was possible funding, the funding fell through. He then applied in 2016 for more funding. He was like, yes, let's do it. Didn't work out for other reasons. And then the conversation just trickled on, and eventually it happened, and he upgraded it to a Major Lazer tour. And so, you know, invitations, I think you've got to be thinking about expanding your network, especially with international artists, making those connections early, because it does take a lot of time to get to the point of actually confirming and announcing. In terms of other artists, I think there are different styles. When it comes to Lake of Stars, for example, we like to book, when we first announce our dates and our venue, usually, we need to have 3 or 4 Malawian artists alongside an international artist that we want to announce at that stage. But that's often before our funding is fully confirmed. So we then spend, you know, the next few months building the rest of our program and announcing bit by bit. Other people like to have their entire lineup booked and then announce that at once, but obviously that's something that you can only do if you have the luxury of having your funding fairly secure at a certain stage. So yeah, I mean, I think it does depend on your festival. Invitations should be as soon as you know what you're doing and when you're doing it, try and get those out. Confirming an artist and announcing them, having gone through all the negotiations and all the contracting and knowing what you're able to offer, you know, and sometimes they'll be like, well, until I know what hotel I'm staying at, I'm not going to sign the contract. So that could take some time. Just try and get it done as soon as possible, but you will be waiting on these different moving pieces to always sort of come together at the right time. Information packs, I'd say, whenever they're ready, send them out, even if it's the day before the festival. But ideally aim for 2 weeks, I think. think that's realistic for most of us. If you can do it earlier, then that's great. But if you're doing it 2 weeks ahead of time, I think that gives the artists enough time to take it in. Yeah, and if you send it too much earlier, they might not even read it necessarily. So yeah, I think that's important. And when it comes to timelines as well, I think it's also really important to understand, like Rashida was saying, managers are not always the easiest to deal with. It's true. And sometimes it's because they have to go through a whole chain of people to make sure, oh, is this tour happening? Is the sound engineer able to come? We should talk to the artist. Oh, but does the artist want to bring, their girlfriend or their husband? Are they going to be traveling with their kids? And it takes a lot of time for all those things to sort of fit together. So when it comes to timelines and requesting information from artists, from managers, expect it to take longer, and sort of plan that into your timeline accordingly. Yeah, and I think this all comes back to advancing and making sure that you start that process as soon as possible. It is tricky because you want a lot of information from them. You're going to need publicity information, you're going to need technical information, and you're going to need transport information. You might need copies of their passports if you're booking their flights and stuff. This takes a lot of time to gather, and if you just send it as one big email, things are going to get missed, I think. Which is why maybe an online fillable form is one way of working it. Or you might want to think about breaking it into different emails or different forms. Send one out 4 months ahead of time with all the travel information you need from them and the publicity information so you can announce them. And then maybe 2 months before the festival, your stage manager might get in touch about your technical writer. And then, a few weeks before your festival, you're sending out your information pack and just confirming everything. And that's a relatively realistic timeline for most of us. Got a couple more minutes, but if anyone has any follow-up questions about Artist Liaison or anything connected to it, then please feel free to share them with me over email or WhatsApp. I think most of you have my contacts. If not, get in touch with Anike and she can share your thoughts with me. And thank you so much, for tuning in and for listening to me waffle on and on for an hour. I apologize it hasn't been more interactive, but thanks for all your questions and your engagement. And I'd also love to hear over chat now, over email, or when we meet in April, your kinds of experiences with Artist Liaison. Do you run things in a way that's similar to how I've described? Because obviously, I think, we have a whole range of festivals represented amongst this group. So it's sometimes useful to hear how people do things differently. And hopefully some of the things that I've spoken about are things that you're probably doing already. I think most of us, having run successful festivals, we know what we're doing with looking after artists. But it's good just to hear sometimes. I feel like a lot of people don't always understand what goes into making a festival work, and just connecting with other festival directors is a good opportunity to consolidate what we're already doing sometimes. So I'll share my number on here on the chat. So that's my WhatsApp number. So feel free to hit me up with any questions on WhatsApp. And it's now time to sort of log off. But thanks so much for tuning in. And we've got another one at some point in January, a Thursday at 10 a.m. Nigeria time as well. I'll just have to double check. And Anike will be in touch with you about the exact details. But in the meantime, I hope you guys have a great festive season. For those of you who've got events coming up around this time of year, I know some of you have New Year's stuff going on. So best of luck for preparations around that. And thanks so much. It was great.